Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Battleground. This is a podcast where Battle and friends talk all things wrestling and laugh with comedians that are way funnier than him. And you never know who's going to stop by. Here is your host, Battle.
We're back. It's another episode of Battleground. My name is Battle. Thank you guys so much for hanging out and downloading the podcast. Eli is not here today. He had to go out of town, but there's a big event happening tomorrow night over in Morrison, Tennessee. It is at the Victory Center. SideShow Wrestling putting on their big Super Showdown show. The main event, the Carnies versus Billy Gunn and James Storm. And it just so happens that one half of the Carnies is going to be hanging out with us in the studio today, Kerry Awful. And if you'd like to get your tickets for this Super Showdown, you can like SideShow Wrestling on Facebook. Just search SideShow Wrestling. Tickets are only $20 for all seats, and the bell rings at 8 o'clock. So without further ado, why don't we just go ahead and jump on into it. Kerry Awful, one half of the Carnies, in studio.
Let's get ready to rumble.
All right, it is going down tomorrow, Morrison, Tennessee, SideShow Wrestling Super Showdown. Tons of people are going to be there. WWE Hall of Famer Billy Gunn, former Impact Wrestling star James Storm, and some guys that are going to be wrestling him tomorrow in a tag team match. The Carnies going to be there. Kerry Awful is in the building. How you doing, man?
I'm doing excellent. Wonderful. Despite my last name being awful, everything's coming up Millhouse like on The Simpsons. I'm so excited about this opportunity at SideShow Wrestling on Saturday to wrestle two people who've defined tag team wrestling. I mean, look at James Storm, his work with America's Most Wanted and Beer Money. And even if we go back to America's Most Wanted, I remember going to the asylum, lying to my parents in high school, saying I was going to go study.
Yep.
And I would drive to downtown Nashville to the sketchy, legendary fairgrounds.
Every Wednesday night.
Yeah. And so getting to wrestle him in the state of Tennessee is really cool. It's super cool to wrestle Billy Gunn, who's... No, it's not any secret. Billy Gunn's like one of Nick's, if not Nick's, favorite wrestler. So like things like that are always going to be special, especially considering that I think this might be his first match after going into the Hall of Fame.
I think it is, according to everything I've seen. I mean, he hasn't done anything since then. So yeah, first match for you guys against them. Yeah,
and which is great, especially because we're going to dump them with a Force Destroyer right on their brain and tell them to, get out of our state because we are tag team wrestling in the state of Tennessee now. And as great as their accolades and contributions to professional wrestling are, they're not the circus, they're not the Carnies, the ringleader Nick Iggy, the dog-faced gargoyle Kerry Awful. It's funny, you meet a lot of your idols in wrestling, and sometimes it's real cool and sometimes it's real bad. But at the end of the day, the only thing I'm really worried about is beating them, because even though that Billy just went into the Hall of Fame, and even though James Storm has done all this for Tennessee, the last 8 years of my life and my tag team partner's life, I've wrestled all over this country, getting paid to do so, help buy my house, and punches and wrist locks and finger torture, pile drivers and power bombs. I think a lot of people there are going to think and expect one thing, and I'm going to do the exact opposite of that. I'm going to flip that. I'm going to invert it by inverting and flipping them upside down with our finishing maneuver, the Force Destroyer.
There it is right there. Let's talk about it. So SideShow Wrestling, all seats only $10. Bell time is at 8, 7 o'clock. You can actually meet the stars. So for people who don't know, who are new to the Carnies, let's just talk about this. Let's go back to where it all began. How did you get into wrestling? I mean, we talked a little bit before we cracked the mics.
So, I always like to ask my students and people I meet, what's your earliest memory of wrestling? Because I'll never forget mine. I was sick at home. I was a very sick kid. I was like one of those bubble kids, tent kids.
Yeah.
Underdeveloped lungs. I had what's called a nebulizer. It's like a breathing machine for my lungs and all this other crazy stuff. Just super sick. So as a kid, I didn't get to play a lot or go out a lot because I was not bedridden close to it a lot until I got over those health complications. I had a babysitter named Miss Kiki. And Miss Kiki was awesome, and she'd watch wrestling on Saturday mornings. And the first time I can remember that, vividly, was Coco Beware and Owen Hart And then Coco's doing the Birdman dance with Frankie. And I'm looking at these guys, and they got these bright tights, and they're colorful, and there's a bird. And my babysitter's doing the Birdman dance, waving her hands. And I'm like 5 years old, so I'm up doing the bird dance because it looks fun. And then I watched them wrestle, and it was game over. You couldn't convince me otherwise that superheroes weren't real. You couldn't convince me that I couldn't have superpowers of my own. You couldn't change my mind that when bad things happen, some form of good would come and find restitution for that. And it was game over for a guy that couldn't be a football player or a baseball player, t-ball player, or whatever as a kid. You see that. And sometimes it's cool because you see that transformation between really nice guys that turn into these larger-than-life things when time demands it. And I think the seeing that as a kid so profoundly affected me. It's why I love comic books and Dragon Ball Z and TV shows and music and art, all of it. Because that, to me, was the realest representation of that I could see. I couldn't touch Wolverine from the X-Men in real life. But if I paid my money, maybe he was lucky enough to get on the front row, I could high-five Owen Hart on his way to the ring.
Right.
That's how it started for me. And I fought it. I always wanted to be a pro wrestler. As a kid, I was convinced I'd either be an X-Man or a professional wrestler. And as years go by and stuff happens, you get older in life. And I was like in my early to mid-20s. And I was like, oh, man, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I don't have a college education at the time. I'm lucky enough to have one now. I was working a dead-end job. I'd served tables for years and years and years. I had a talk with my girlfriend at the time. He was like, oh, that's a horrible idea. You shouldn't do it. And thought to my dad, and he's like, oh, you'll never make any money doing that, and what are you going to do? And my mom, too, and everybody. And I had this, like, weird thing with the universe where I asked the universe, like, hey, give me some kind of sign that I'm not crazy and I want to do this. I'm going to fire up my computer when I go to bed that night, wake up the next morning, get on my computer, and I see this website that I go to for news and stuff, and it said Dutch Mantel was opening a wrestling school. When I was a kid, we would get Memphis Wrestling on TV after WWE TV or Burt Brennan's TV or whatever. And I'd see Dutch. Dutch was like a hero. And later on in life, I remember watching Music City Wrestling. They'd come on at it was a death slot, like 3 a.m.
Yeah.
It was after Memphis wasn't airing anymore at the time. And I was like 13 then. And Dutch would have his AOL screen name at the bottom of a segment to be like, if you have any questions about today, message me, Dirty Dutch Mantel, which his screen name was Sozio Dutch, which was like Dirty Dutch and like whatever. And it was part of his shtick in Puerto Rico. And so I'd message him as a 13-year-old kid, and he'd be telling me like wild stories. And then years later, I saw that, and I was like, well, this is a sign. I had a tryout class. It was the most physically destroying, mentally, crippling experience I had. I knew I wasn't cut out to wrestle. I wanted it so bad, but I was in such bad shape, and I just had no self-confidence, And Dutch called me and wanted me to take it, and I didn't do it. And he called me a couple months later. Hey, you want to wrestle yet? And I'd make excuses. Oh, no. I don't want to do that. Are you sure? You're horrible, but maybe if you tried for a million years, you might be able to do something. Oh, no. 2 more months ago, until finally I gave in. And it was crazy because he'd ask me to go to class, but instead of just hanging up the phone because he didn't get my money, he'd say, hey, you know what I would have booked for this? And we just talk. It was so crazy to me. I was just happy to have that relationship with someone I grew up watching. I trained with him for a long time. He had one student before that named Jeremiah Riggs who just got into it tough enough, really started advertising at school. And then he would teach, but his body was so hurt that he would get Josephus from the NWA now, but he was Josephus Brody to us then. For anyone listening to this also, if you watch the Vice documentary that just came out about Bruiser Brody, that's out there right now, he actually plays Bruiser Brody in it. That's
right, yeah.
Realistic and identical they looked. So I trained with him, and it was crazy. And then he went to go book Rinka King after I had my first match, and that led me to Tasha Simone, who's a 3-time NWA Women's World Champion, who's helped people out like Nick, myself, and Sue Young, She was trained by Chris Adams. I mean, just toughest woman I've ever known in my life. I call her mom lovingly now. But because of all that, I ended up wrestling. And I met Nick Iggy at a show around town and then another one. And we got into an angle and all this stuff. And I'm very much like a goal-oriented person when it comes to wrestling. I think that's what keeps us sane. And I think a lot of successful wrestlers feel that way. And I told Nick, Nick was like what some people would call like a top billed talent. He was main eventing all these shows, and I'd be somewhere at the bottom or the middle. And I was talking to him. Nick never grew up watching the independents. He didn't even like watching WCW as a kid because he felt like he was cheating on WWF.
I think a lot of kids kind of thought that growing up.
Oh, absolutely. You know, because they teach us brand loyalty at that age.
Oh, yeah.
Coke or Pepsi, you know. But I was talking to him, and I was getting booked out of state before him, you know. And I was like, hey, man, you should come on the road with me. I got this idea. We're having some fun being these two generic white guys, being a tag team. What if we put something behind it? And I had a buddy named Jimmy Felcher who actually helped me get my first ideologies or thoughts of who or what I was inside of the ring. And then we worked it all together until we found out what we really were. We were Team IOU, which was I thought I was a dog. Nick thought he was a boy in a man's body. And we found some good success, real Memphis-y, some would even say Chikara influence style characters. And then we did that for a while, and we weren't getting to where we wanted, so we had to like reevaluate it. And so we did. And then everyone, no matter what we did, we wanted to be like people like tag teams like the Young Bucks or Davey Richards, Eddie Edwards, or whatever. But at the end of the day, that's not who we are, no matter how hard we tried. And we realized we weren't getting booked into places or matches that did that. So if you get stale, what do? Reinvent yourself. We became the Carnies Team IOU, just unapologetically Southern. A Carney, a lot of people don't know, the wrestling was founded in the circus. That's actually, if you look into it, that is the birthplace of our profession. And then when they split off and realized that professional wrestling didn't have to live in the circus with a trio of gentlemen that are sometimes referred to the Gold Dust Trio and stuff, they legitimized it. And then, of course, that's the roots, though. Carnival shows, professional wrestling, tough man competitions of people. And some people will use corny as a derogatory term, just like we do in modern culture, like as an insulting colloquialism.
Right.
And it's very much the same in wrestling. Oh, they're all right, but they're just nothing but Southern carnies. Cool, you're going to call me that? I'm going to wear it as a badge of honor, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to throw this on my throat, and I'm going to do every dirty Tennessee tactic we could. We were lucky enough to do a camp for a very prominent company that we've had a couple matches for. And someone that I looked up to was actually, I'll just say it right now, I've never really publicly said it, but we did the tryout seminar camp with them, and Christopher Daniels was the guy, and that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he was like, I get it, I understand why you're Team IOU. We've heard the name and stuff, but when we see you, you're the Carnies, and he helped give us the rough idea of what we would become later in life. And it was crazy because once we committed to that, we were both big fans of American Horror Story anyway, so we were already leading to that with our stuff. But when we jumped full in on the circus deal, it was crazy. Our bookings went up. Our merch was selling way more. It was easy to digest for people to be like, oh, that dude's clearly a sideshow freak, and that guy's the ringleader. That's the brains, that's the brawns. And people were just... it was much easier to identify as such. And that's why I got into wrestling. I'm very long-winded and a diatribe kind of guy.
Right, and that kind of answers the question because a lot of people were wanting to kind of know how that Carnies gimmick came about, but now you answered that. So let's move on to the next one. The big main event tomorrow night is the Carnies versus Billy Gunn and James Storm. What's going through your mind when they call you and say, okay, look, here's what's happening. You're going to wrestle these two guys.
So a lot of stuff, right? You always wonder. You're thinking, if this was a couple years ago, I wouldn't have slept for 3 days already, and I'd be sweating through. I'm watching all the kinds of tape I can. You know what I mean? And just really overthinking it.
Right.
Unfortunately, this is probably going to be disappointing to everybody. At this point, it's another day at the office. Dutch and Tasha both in separate ways and separate words to tell me. And my buddy Jimmy Felcher also. Why are you nervous? They're in the same locker room you're in. They lace up their boots the same that you do. This is professional wrestling. It's a sport, right? Any given day, an underdog could win, right? Maybe they don't. But the way I see it, as a professional, as this is what I do to keep my lights on, they are great. They are unstoppable forces. I couldn't dream of the life that they've lived provided through professional wrestling. I can't think of the moments they've experienced in front of crowds bigger than I've been in front of. And at the same time, that ain't going to stop me from experiencing it now because I'm going to beat them. I'm not going to sweat it. I'm not going to worry about the Hall of Fame for Billy. I'm not going to worry about the legend of the Cowboy James Storm. I don't care about how many titles or accolades, because when it rings, the bell rings. Like, I'm there to do my job, and my job's to be a pro wrestler that wins.
Right.
Which is crazy, right? I know that's a weird thing, but if you're asking about how I approach it, both it's so weird because wrestling is this weird veil of reality, right? But at the end of the job, if you're paid to contract a house and you've got to work with a world famous, whatever guy, say it's a TLC show and you get hired on because you're good at walling, doing something with the walls.
Right.
But you're in here with this world famous dude. Makes you nervous? Maybe. But if you're there to do your job, the front and back of your hand, nothing to sweat. I hope they, honestly, I hope that they're ready. I hope that they're ready to do something special, because I am at the bottom of my heart. My days of being coward or intimidated by people by their own success, gone. I'm here to make a moment. I want no doubt in any fan's mind, whether they watch it on TV, YouTube, or in every one of those chairs every 8 inches, they're going to remember that Kerry and Nick stood up nose to nose with them. That's what my character in my life is. I know my worth. As an awful guy, I make no qualms about going to the lowest common denominator to win matches by any means necessary. So Hall of Fame's all nice and good until Nick and I grab a folding chair when no one's looking and smash it on you.
Once that bell rings, it's off.
Yeah. Man.
And it's going to be crazy tomorrow night at the Victory Center in Morrison, Tennessee. SideShow Wrestling, the Super Showdown. One half of the Carnies is hanging out in the studio with us, Kerry Awful. So let me ask you this. Let's say someone wants some advice about wanting to get into wrestling. I saw on your Instagram that there is a Carnies wrestling seminar. Tell me about if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I really want to be a professional wrestler.
The first thing I would do is tell them, are you sure? Because I don't want to be a professional wrestler on some of my bad days, which is, it's true and not true, right? Because you love it so much. So I have a wrestling school called Crux Wrestling. I run it out of Tullahoma, Tennessee, even though I live in Middle Tennessee, and we carpool down there every week like a little ragtag group, I have tryout days, and that's something I picked up from Dutch. Wrestling's not easy. When Hulk Hogan learned how to wrestle, overseas from Baba, he asked Baba, teach me to be a professional wrestler. And Baba's like, cool, get down on your hands and knees, Greco-Roman style. And Hogan's like, okay, we're going to wrestle. Baba dropped a knee on his ankle and shattered it and says, you want to be a wrestler, come back in a year. Hogan did. He waited the year, got healed up, came back and did it. It used to be professional wrestling used to be something of you had to prove your merit and worth to go into it, and you had to protect it, right? And because of that, you had to kind of show your grit, and I don't want to say vetted by any means, but you have to be tested.
Yeah.
For me, I make them condition and drill. When you go into an actual wrestling school, the amount of conditioning and just physical pain that goes into it is soul crushing sometimes. But if you can persevere through it, then yes, you should go and you should try it. If it was me, I would say do your research. You should contact reputable schools that are ran by people that have done something, been something, or contribute something. And that doesn't always mean an ex-WWE, WW, or WWE Impact, Ring of Honor necessarily. Not that I would discredit any of those, because they're all amazing. All those guys have made money in this business. But there's even other schools that are accredited with guys that have never stepped foot in there. While the school's not active anymore, the third member of the Carnies, Trip Cassidy, was trained by this man named Billy Rock. Billy was a great guy, traveled all through the Indies, had his own following on that level, almost like your favorite obscure punk band.
Right.
He also trained Ruby Riott, who's on WWE Raw, and Mance Warner. So there are schools out there. You just got to make sure that you're going to the school and finding the right one. Go and see if they do a tryout day. Definitely do that. Think about it. Make sure that it's something that you can dedicate mind, body, finances to. Because it's hard. Good education isn't cheap. Don't be surprised if there's a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 tuition on it.
Right, and you get what you pay for.
Absolutely. I could learn from somebody. It's weird because it almost contradicts it. Some of the best trainers I know have never been on national TV, right? also some of the absolute worst trainers I've experienced don't even wrestle once a month and they're training people, or have only wrestled for a year and are training people. And that's equally as frustrating. Due diligence will solve it for anyone. Do the research. And most importantly, if you want to be a wrestler, it's better to try and fail that tryout class than to sit at home and wonder, what if?
Right. Man, that's good stuff right there. Kerry Awful, one half of the Carnies, is hanging out with us right now. SideShow Wrestling is going down the Super Showdown Victory Center in Morrison, Tennessee tomorrow. Let's kind of jump into some other stuff. I know you've wrestled. You talked about you've wrestled all over the country. What's been the craziest thing you've seen at an event? And I can tell you one that I saw, and it was years ago, and it was in the back of a Discount Tobacco and Beer store in Madison. There was like this little wrestling promotion that would be in there. Chicken Hat was there.
You know, he was missing for a while?
That's what everybody's been trying to figure out, what's been happening with Chicken Hat at the moment.
I swear I heard that for anyone listening that doesn't know who Chicken Hat is,
he's like a legend in Nashville wrestling.
As a fan, like he is. You would see him on Raws every TNA event at the fairground.
And it was the same seat every time.
Every time. Big, thick mustache. And he'd have this like almost like Shawn Michaels, like dad cowboy hat thing, you know?
Like that Richard Petty hat.
Yeah, but it'd be like old and feathered, and he'd get worked up, you know? And one day he was just gone. Like, even when TNA was done, he would still come to the local televised show for NWA Saw, and then it was just gone. He disappeared, evaporated. I swear I saw something on Facebook on a comment on a thread where someone was like, I think he went to Florida.
That's what everybody keeps saying.
But no one knows.
But yeah, and somebody was like, he came from a rich family, and
I've heard so many crazy stories.
And there's crazy stories. So we're sitting there at this Discount Tobacco thing, and we would go every week. It was like maybe like on a Wednesday or Thursday night, and it was like the ring, the top rope, you had to like duck because you're hitting the ceiling. Something happened, and I want to say it was Chase Stevens and another guy that now owns a karate studio in Gallatin. I think his name is Eric
Andrews?
Yes.
Does he own a karate studio?
I think he owns a karate studio in Gallatin now.
What?
Yeah. Bald head guy.
Yeah.
What? So they were a tag team. They were feuding with somebody. Something went down, and the match got completely botched.
Uh-huh.
Chris had a cinder block smashed on his nads with a real cinder block, real sledgehammer,
Hammerjack
everything.
was in that match then, guaranteed.
And like Athena was a part of the thing. Chicken Hat and Athena always had issues.
Of course.
Chicken Hat literally, and this is like those wooden folding chairs.
Man, real quick, how awesome was Athena, by the way? She was sick. Like,
right.
You know, like, what's her name in WWE was Texas Athena, Ember Moon, but Athena to me is always her.
Yeah,
know?
and so she was there, and she would always give him shit every week. Like, she would mess with him every week. As the story, he got pissed, took that wooden chair and like threw it as hard as he could at her. Like, security came out, Boogie Woogie Boy came out, like all these guys are coming out, and it was a shit show. Like, people were going crazy, and he's screaming and yelling, and that was the last time I ever went to that event.
Oh, of course. So like, sometimes I miss wild stuff. Like, I don't ever want any fan endangerment, but like,
right.
I think if you achieve mass hysteria at a wrestling event without having that, like the crowd interactions on it, like the like crowd endangerment, I guess, for whatever, because he got worked up. That's wrestling used to be that.
Yeah.
It's just like how you said, like, oh, I'm never coming back. I don't blame you for that. But think about all the people who came back. They're like, yo, what's happening next? Cinder blocks, sledgehammers to the nards, people throwing chairs, fans throwing chairs. Like, that's a spectacle.
It was crazy. So let's hear something crazy story. I mean, it might be.
Okay, so like this might take a second because I've really I've seen some crazy stuff, and without naming a lot of them, one time while working in the Kentucky Anna area, I watched a very well-to-do Hall of Famer now from a couple years ago get into a fight with a promoter over money. It was a big house event inside of a venue. So I don't want to give out too many details. Long story short, I watched two
as he's sitting over here laughing, he knows where this is going.
Yeah, I got my buddy in the room here with me, without naming names on him.
He already knows. He's like sitting here knowing what's about to happen.
So, like, this is like crazy, and like we've worked for this company. It's publicly is a well-respected company. Like, it's a place that guys like AJ Styles, Daniel Bryan, Cesaro, Chris Hero, Eric Cannon, like, it's good. I'm just gonna say it. Like, I want to, but I'm not going to. Anyways, it was like a spot that like most accredited like independent wrestlers, while they're doing that grind to the next level, go to, and you'll learn a lot. I learned tons there, tons and tons and tons there. Like, it's crazy. Made some lifelong friends there and stuff too. But watching this Hall of Famer, who I've also like grown up watching wrestling, getting this like crazy fight, locker rooms getting ready to get involved, and they're like, no one out there is.
Nobody knows what's going on. Yeah,
it was crazy. It got resolved. I'll put it that way. It all got resolved. Everything's cool. But at the time, you're like, is there a knife getting pulled out? Cool.
You're kind of waiting to see. Yeah. Man, that's crazy stuff. Kerry Awful is my guest right now, one half of the Carnies. That is going down Morrison, Tennessee at the Victory Center SideShow Wrestling Super Showdown. One last question. I'd like to ask wrestlers this. If you could call your dream match right now, who would it be and what kind of match would it be? Okay. The bucket list.
It breaks down into two different lists that then go into sub-lists, right? Because, like, everybody wants to, like, wrestle the greatest of all times. Right?
Yeah.
Like, who wouldn't want to wrestle Shawn Michaels or Flair, Jericho, Stone Cold Rocks or whatever? And I think that, like, a lot in Taker, too, especially Taker, Mankind, stuff like that. Like, so, like, I have, like, fantasy side, complete fantasy side, and then, like, stuff I applicably use.
Such an awesome time having Dan Cummins hanging out. Don't forget, he is at Zanies. You can also check out his podcast, Time Suck, wherever you get your podcast. And podcast time. Let me just shamelessly plug my own that you're listening to. You can download this podcast anywhere you get your podcast, iTunes. You can listen to it on the free iHeartRadio app. I am on social media if you want to follow me. It is Battle on Air. By the way, next week a new episode is going to drop. There is going to be some new stuff happening on the podcast. I cannot wait to tell you what that is. So make sure you stay tuned, up to date of everything that is Battleground, Instagram, Twitter, where we're at Battle on Air. Until next time, like I always say, 2 fingers and elbow, boom.
Or lit on fire with his, like an effigy of his logo while I slowly try to fight my way out.
Right, you want old school Taker.
Yeah, I want that. I want like crazy, like, is he really dead? Undertaker, I take a lot. It's like no secret to anyone that knows me or watches like my work or even how I look. Like, I love Mick Foley. If I get aspired to be the professional wrestler that Mick Foley was and the man that he is, then I would feel accomplished in wrestling. And I just want to see. Where I'd line up with him, because there's not, to me, almost no one can get a crowd to go from cheering and crying out of happiness to crying out of complete and utter sadness for watching human suffering.
Right.
I always talk about, like, the moment that I thought Mick Foley became super popular was actually after a match and Beyond the Mat came out, and you watched him handcuffed, taking chair shots to the
straight to the head,
in front of his crying kids and wife. Why? Got to put a roof over the babies' heads.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I became a fan. So, like, I want that. Also, my, like, guilty pleasure, Tajiri. I have this irrational love of Tajiri from WWE. His body language, the way he carries himself. For my entire career, I've based stuff off of him. When I was the dog, he almost was like a pet for William Regal, where, like, when you talk to your dog and your dog, like, doesn't understand what you're saying, but it's nodding.
But he knows what's going on. Yeah.
So, like, Regal would say something to Tajiri, and Tajiri would say something back, and he's like, "Oh, I don't understand you, Tajiri. We need to do this." And Tajiri would be so hyped and so pumped, and you could know exactly what he was thinking through his body and his eyes without him saying one word. The way he'd stalk people in the ring and prowl them. Dude, there's like this like random throwaway match with him and Taker that's insane.
Yeah,
like he's got so many just like little hidden gems. Like, you ever get? I make my students watch these a lot, and my friends who ask for advice. If I'm trying to get a job at like a TV studio or a televised show, right? Watch televised matches. You'd be surprised what someone that Tajiri or Crash Holly can get accomplished in like 4 minutes.
Yeah,
and still feel like I watched a fulfilling story in professional wrestling match and learned something new about either his characters, the story they're telling, or maybe myself from even watching him do it. Tajiri was in Tennessee a little while ago. I almost cried because I want that match so bad, so bad.
Well, we're just gonna throw it out there that this match should happen.
Yeah,
we're gonna put it out there in the universe just to make it happen.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I don't know. I'm a carny. Lie, cheat, steal. Let's keep the circus open. If it meant that I could get a match with Tajiri, I'd step on broken glass at this point. I don't care who tells me that looks stupid. Well, it is stupid, because to me, Tajiri means that much to me. So whatever, if anyone's listening here and wants to do that, let's go.
There it is.
We're back.
Victory Center tomorrow night, Morrison, Tennessee, SideShow Wrestling Super Showdown. My guest today, one half of the Carnies, Kerry Awful, in the building. Man, thank you so much for taking the time out and hanging out with us today.
No, thank you so much for having us, despite this horrible, why Nashville's traffic was never bad. This whole population boom that we're getting, killing the traffic.
It's all the condos.
Oh, it's brutal. It's brutal.
Miserable.
If you don't mind, some cheap plugs.
Yeah, go ahead. That's what I was going to say. Go ahead and plug everything you want everybody to follow you, social media, whatnot. So
anybody who's listening to this right now, you should come out tomorrow and watch me beat Billy Gunn and James Storm with my tag team partner in the Carnies, Nick Iggy. If you're on social media, please follow me. It's very easy, at KerryAwful, Kerry Awful, across the board. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. I don't have a Tumblr nor a Zynga or a Live Journal, but I'm sure if I did at one point, it was probably at Kerry Awful. Also follow the Carnies at the Carnies TN and ProWrestlingTees.com/the Carnies, because every t-shirt you buy puts money in keeping our circus up and afloat. And I got to keep the lights on.
There it is. Kerry Awful, my guest today. Thanks, man.
Thank you so much.
I gotta say, so awesome having Kerry Awful in the studio. I got to sit there and talk wrestling with the guy. He told me all about the Carnies, how they all started, and what's it like getting to wrestle WWE Hall of Famer tomorrow night, Billy Gunn. Tomorrow night in Morrison, Tennessee at the Victory Center. Tickets only $10. You can get all the info you need to know, like SideShow Wrestling on Facebook. And by the way, if you could do me a big favor, after you've listened to this podcast, go back, download all the other podcasts, give us a 5-star review, leave us a good rating, and if you want to, you could follow me on social media, Twitter, Instagram. It's Battle on Air. Which, by the way, another episode is going to drop Monday. If you've seen on Twitter, you have seen that me, being stupid, have called out Mark Henry on Twitter. Well, he left a little video, and so Mark Henry in studio Monday. Enjoy, have a great weekend. I will see you guys on Monday.